I've sort of been chasing the same experience ever since. Not necessarily the same gameplay, but the same experience, that same feeling. And I've just never reached it. I've just never hit it. So for me, it's just a uniquely special, singular video game experience. And that's why I chose it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Kirby Conversations. I'm Sean Douglas. I'm a writer and podcaster, and I am here again with Bridget. Hi, Bridget.
Hey, I'm Bridget. I am a big, longtime Kirby fan, artist, a collector, and just generally been playing since Game Boy, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great to have you back. And we have a special guest on this show. We have Nic McConnell, and we know Nic now through Flashback 64. Listeners of this show will know that our podcast has a sort of ongoing sort of collaboration with them now and then. And they thought that Nic should come on our show, and Nic has done a lot with Flashback 64. So I said, sure, Nic, you're welcome to come on our show too. And then we were talking about what game you might want to talk about. And you suggested Kirby Canvas Curse. But before we get to that, Nic, would you like to introduce yourself and your various projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the record, for everybody listening, it sounds like Flashback 64 is to blame in case I turn this whole endeavor sideways. So
yeah, it's all their fault.
Yeah, it's all their fault. Unbelievable, those folks. No, it's great. It's so good to be here, and thank you so much. My name is Nic. I've been a Kirby guy. I guess I'll call myself a Kirby guy since the Game Boy days, and very warm memories of that era. I am currently a Kirby dad. My kids are playing Kirby a lot these days, so Kirby's been top of mind. When I am not in the Kirby mind space, I work at Riot Games, doing age ratings work and global, content sensitivity checks, I guess is what you'd call it. And when I'm not doing that, I love video game manuals and host a stream Wednesdays at noon Pacific called Instruction Derby, where I just read through the lost art of video game manuals and check out all the weird, wild, and silly stuff that's in those. So thanks for having me. This is very exciting. I am so excited to talk about Canvas Curse. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you here. And speaking of Instruction Derby, too, I've definitely listened to episodes of Flashback 64 where you've come on and gone through the manuals. And now I feel like I can't look at a manual without thinking of it being like read out loud and really thinking of it as its own sort of artistic medium.
That's awesome. Oh, that makes me feel very good to hear that. That is really cool. Those things are special, right? There's some real gems out there. People put a lot of effort into them. I read the Wario World for GameCube manual today, actually, and the amount of effort that went into that thing from a characterization standpoint is out of control. I strongly suggest picking it up and having a look.
Nice. Yeah, I was looking at the Fighters Mega Mix one, the Sega Saturn game, and just how sort of like silly it is and jokey it is while it's telling you how to play the game. And it's just like having that extra kind of voice behind it. It'd be great to get more of that in games.
I'm with you completely. And I don't want to derail, but I'll say, I think like one of the things that has really spoken to me from looking at those manuals is just like the human element of the whole thing. I think as a kid, I grew up playing video games and they just sort of show up right under the Christmas tree or at a birthday party or something like that. They just show up from the back door at that Toys R Us. And it's really opening up those manuals and realizing from a younger age, like, oh, right, people put this together. Like there were groups of people putting their creativity into it and lots of effort. And I think that makes it feel really special and pretty timeless to go back to, honestly.
Yeah, I do kind of miss that experience. I played Soul Calibur, the original Soul Calibur, for the first time a few weeks ago.
Ooh.
And I forced myself to like sit down and read the manual first. It's like, I'm going to enjoy the anticipation of going through this manual and kind of experiencing it almost like a kid again, where you'd be looking at the manual before you'd have the chance to play it.
Oh, that's great.
But speaking of Kirby Canvas Curse, shall we get into that now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So For anyone not familiar, Kirby Canvas Curse is, of course, a 2005 Nintendo DS game from Nintendo and HAL Laboratory that has its big hook being the use of the stylus to draw on the screen. So Kirby has been turned into a ball. He's in, I probably want to word this exactly correctly. Does this world have a name? It's like a paint world that's been created by the sorceress Dracia, and with the help of the magical paintbrush that controls him, he's able to eventually defeat Dracia and return back to his home world. But he's in this world of paint in this game. And you control Kirby by tapping on him to make him dash forward, or by drawing a line on the screen that he can ride along or bounce along using just the physics of the platforms you create with the pen. So, Nick, why did you choose this one? When I asked you about which Kirby game you wanted to talk about, what was it about this one?
I think the key thing for me is just I think this is my favorite Kirby game. I really appreciate the Kirby games that take a swing at something different, not which is no shade at the rest of the other Kirby games or the more traditional ones. I love those too, but the freedom with which the developers seem to express themselves when it comes to Kirby is maybe on display here more so than anywhere else. It's also an incredibly tactile feeling game. A tactile feeling, I guess that's redundant. A very tactile game. And I got it when it came out pretty much right away, almost 20 years ago now. Oh my God. And I lost like that entire day to it. And I just remember coming out of those play sessions, looking around and visualizing the world around me with that paintbrush. I remember driving a car, looking on the freeway and sort of visualizing that little paintbrush stylus thing to navigate the road, which in retrospect is like maybe kind of a scary concept for someone behind the wheel of a car. But that was the impact that this game had on me. And it's one of those games that I've sort of been chasing the same experience ever since. Not necessarily the same gameplay, but the same experience, that same feeling. And I've just never reached it. I've just never hit it. So for me, it's just a uniquely special, singular video game experience. And that's why I chose it.
I think it's a great choice. I really love this title too for a lot of the same reasons. And I'm a huge fan of the traditional Kirby's, and some of my most favorite entries are pretty much the traditional Kirby's. But going back and playing this one, like, I just fell more in love with it than the first time I had played it, and had a real like growing appreciation for it. And I agree, yeah, it's very tactile and it makes it very unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was picking this up again, it really reminded me of how much a lot of classic video games will have like a song or a sound effect or something that like immediately sparks your memories and takes you back to that time in your life. Whereas this game has a physical experience. And not a lot of games have that like muscle memory you associate with it. But even as someone who like, I play my Nintendo DS like now and then, like it wasn't that unusual to pick it up again. But I hadn't played a really stylus heavy game in a while. And just like drawing on that screen and having to sort of reorient your brain to like that kind of control really took me back to what it was like when it was new and people were doing all sorts of interesting experimental stuff with the stylus. And Kirby Canvas Curse did it better than a lot of them. Not that there weren't a lot of other ones, but there were some kind of, some where it's maybe like, okay, just tap the screen to do this, or little mini games or something like this. And they really found a way to incorporate it into a full-fledged platformer that just totally works and totally feels so seamless.
It really does, and it really is. And there's a precision to the whole thing that I was surprised. Like, so again, I played it a ton when it came out, and it's kind of been since then that I've really dropped back in. I actually had to go and charge my DS Lite to its fullest capabilities because it's been unplugged in a box for, God knows how many years at this point. And I was surprised at the fidelity of the interactions with the touchscreen through the stylus. It is just so precise and so clean, and I love the way that it marries that sort of really technical precision alongside the kind of freewheeling, like slow going exploration that the levels invite you to do. It's a really unique gameplay experience.
Yeah, I agree. There's some good exploration too when you're collecting the medals. But even if you wanted to kind of speed it, there's these time trials, these line trials. I don't know. It probably I was just going back too. I just didn't even realize just how much content there is there.
Yeah.
Especially for a Kirby game, it just felt really like rich.
Yep.
Yeah, when I was revisiting it, sometimes for some of these games, I'll go back and play through them again. It's like, I'm not going to play through this from the beginning. I think I'm just going to jump around to different stages in one of the files I already had and play it that way, because there's just a lot of game here.
I was just gonna say, like, I think, yeah, you talk about there's a lot of stuff in here, and coming back to it again, it's been so long that the muscle memory was there for me to do this. All of that came right back, but I didn't really remember too well the like the specific moments or the game's beats or the way the levels were even structured or any of those sorts of things. So it was new to me, and yeah, just the diversity of gameplay, like mechanics and things that it asks you to do. The boss levels ask you to do a whole different type of thing. They're like their own little mini games. I love the long jump mini game. There's just an endless amount of stuff to do on top of really fun exploration. It's so cool. The DS is such a great system. I'm coming back on this one. The DS is so good.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best uses of the DS too. Like, I agree that there are other games that do get some good use out of the touchscreen, but this feels like so core to like what we were kind of hoping from like a system that was kind of advertised as having touchscreen controls and like the kind of gameplay that might be possible with that. And like, you go back and think on some of these other games, like they might use it a little here and there. You could pet the Nintendog or, check something off on a map on the bottom screen. But this is like a whole game experience, and it's all of it. The sub games, the mini games, the boss fights, the trials, the use of powers, interacting with things in the levels, from turning lights on to stopping spinning, danger in the level, like attacking enemies too. Like, it is so thoroughly about like this is why I own a DS. Like, this is what it's for. It's for this game.
Yeah, and I don't mean to imply that there weren't other games that use the touchscreen well, because there are plenty of games that use the touchscreen well. This is just the only example I can think of off the top of my head that incorporated it into a platformer, and it wasn't just a matter of mini games or like stopping the action to like draw a symbol on the screen. I don't know. I can't really think of a lot of other like touchscreen style platformers that quite do what, like none do it exactly the way this game does. But I'm trying to think of other games that even sort of attempted to do something like this, and I can't really think of examples either.
Yeah,
I think there's a Yoshi Touch and Go game, which I never played, and I don't think it's as remembered as fondly as this game is.
Yeah, I've played that, and it is pretty different.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know.
it is interesting, right? Because you mentioned like with the DS, it's like we got this new system. It's got a touch screen. What are we going to do with it? And I think, and this is not shade at any game, but the idea, I think there's a lot of really excellent games where the touch screen interface is kind of obvious, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's like, oh, of course we're going to use this for Trauma Center, right? Like Trauma Center, which is an excellent game about surgery, but it's like, that makes sense, right? It's you're looking at stuff and you're carving things up, or even Elite Beat Agents, which is probably my other favorite DS game. That is a game that uses the stylus profoundly well, but it's like it's a rhythm game, so it's tapping and all that. And their Canvas Curse to me always feels like the game that completely subverted my idea of what a platformer could be using this control style. And the entirety of the game is built around doing it this way, and it's just it really stands out. And again, I also don't mean that as shade to any. I love so many good DS games, but this one's good.
Yeah, WarioWare used it really well.
Yep.
It was fun to do some touchscreen stuff.
Meteos.
Yeah, Meteos is great. It was fun to do some touchscreen stuff in some of the Castlevania games and things, but
Oh yeah, Donosoro, right? You could do like kind of patterns on the screen for things.
Yeah,
That,
and they're like blocks that you had to destroy sometimes. But it was very much like, okay, let's have this like set piece now for the touchscreen. Then we'll go back to playing regular.
yeah.
And then I think the visuals in this one too were just like really amazing to me. Like the painterly aesthetic of everything, and how they'll have like a level that's like a submarine or something, but it's completely abstracted. And it just feels like, it's so like it's the idea of a submarine almost without like really looking like one. And it does such a good job of like conjuring these environments like that aren't like, even if it's just like a background, some traps and things like that, they really feel like these separate worlds.
That is very true. And actually, that was the thing that, this is going to be a recurring theme for me. The thing that I was surprised by when I replayed it again recently is kind of going to be my recurring theme. I straight up did not remember how good this game looks. The colors, these sort of abstracted levels that speak to a concept without really giving you that concept directly. It's just the sprites, everything about it, and that little touch screen on the DS, just the way that it looks, its brightness, its sharpness works so well with this game. There's a real, I don't exactly even know how to describe the look, but there's a real style to this thing that is incredible.
Yeah, I find the levels vibrant, and I like that they could have, since it's a painted world, like they could have done more obvious depictions of just like, it's a background and it's painted or whatever, or make like a game kind of look painted. But I like that different levels kind of had different styles, that you would associate with art, but maybe you wouldn't have thought to do like a level around.
Yeah, and like there's so many like scenes in this game that like you could just take a picture of the screen where it was. It made me kind of wish I had the photo capabilities that the Switch has to just like capture sometimes what these scenes look like.
I was just straight up taking pictures with my phone. I was like, I felt real weird. I just kept putting the thing down. And, since you're using the stylus, Kirby's just rolling around. I'm taking damage. I'm killing Kirby. I'm doing all that, but it's all in service of gorgeous, gorgeous pics. That's what I'm focused on. It is such a fun game to look at. Man, the colors, even just the colors. Now I'm getting excited. Even just the colors on the paint, right? The little thing that you draw on there, the little kind of rainbowy moving colors on there is just like, it's just so vibrant. It's like candy.
Yeah. I like that you can change it too, which is fun.
Oh, you can? I see. I didn't even know. I was so taken by the standard one. I didn't even realize you can change it.
Yeah, there's some other colors.
Yeah. You can unlock some other patterns and it's fun.
Oh man.
I do like the zebra line too. I tend to default to the rainbow one, but I also like the zebra line, which is black and white.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to mention that one.
I know what I'm doing for the rest of the evening is I'm going to go through each and every option and just sink into it.
Yeah.
It's fun just to draw on the screen too, right? There's a bit of that kind of Magnadoodle, like toy-like aspect to just like, it's just kind of fun to draw on a screen, right?
It totally is. And there's the areas in the game too where you are precluded from drawing on the screen. Again, it gets back to that tactile thing. You can really tell just by what the game is sending you from noise and little graphical responses. Like there's areas where there's a static on the screen and you can't draw a line through the static. And it's this sort of unbelievable crackling sensation that the game sends back your way, this feedback. And it's just so cool. I find myself drawing in that area just to sort of feel that sometimes too.
Yeah. I understand what you mean. It's like kind of weird. It's kind of like an ASMR thing where it's like something about the crackle is interesting. There's something else on the subject of the line here. There's something interesting about how this is a platformer that is defined by this kind of navigation, because a big thing with platformers that makes them interesting is how you're given so many options for a character when it comes to movement and having to like recognize how to manage that movement through a level. like when you're playing Mario or whatever, short jumps, long jumps, all kinds of stuff, the way you hit against a wall or something. And there's that sense of like option and control and variety in this game too, even though it's like your Kirby's a ball and you're a line, but you still have to like figure out all these like ways that you can manage Kirby in the navigation that makes it just as like complicated as just like a platformer, like a regular platformer. And like with the underwater level, for instance, suddenly it's so difficult to move because you're like being like sent upwards. So then you suddenly have to realize that you need to draw the line above Kirby rather than always under, like you've been doing, to like navigate him differently. Like all these ways, using loops too to like manage him while he's being pushed a certain way by wind or something like that. Or even the way the different characters might feel when you're playing the game. That just gives it like this like variety that platformers have that I find like really interesting too, is like the movement and control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like a puzzle sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that sometimes too I can get like too literal about thinking about it as a platformer, and then you're reminded like, oh yeah, if there's a projectile coming in, I could just like draw a barrier around him. Like I don't have to dodge it necessarily. Like you forget just all the functionality that your pen has.
Yeah. There's that too. It's like you don't even, I mean, you could approach it from multiple ways too. You could tap the enemies and just bash into them, or just bash into him and have control over your Kirby's dashing. Or you could do things like that where you're just like manipulating the line to make sure they either don't hit you, or you can block them, or they're projectiles. And it's cool. It gives you like different ways to play it too.
Yeah, it's almost like fourth wall breaking, right? To feel like, oh, I can touch the screen and the Waddle Dee will respond to me. Like I can actually interact with this world, and I'm not just controlling Kirby. Like I'm manipulating everything here.
Do you think that's scary for the Waddle Dees? Like they're just doing their thing, and then all of a sudden they're getting tapped. They don't know where it's coming from, but they're about to get killed by Kirby. It's a frightening concept.
Well, I was thinking about that, where it's like, is this really like, am I playing it, or am I playing as the paintbrush? So like they see the paintbrush?
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Or does it still just kind of appear out of the air?
Oh, I don't know.
It's a good question. That's a good question. I guess it probably is the paintbrush, right? It's probably the paintbrush. I will say to the idea of kind of the flexibility that this game gives you too. This is one of those games, and this sounds really corny to say this out loud, so I don't know why I'm saying it, but here we go. It's got a lot of those like aha moments. I feel like it's just one of those games that's built on those, kind of like a puzzle game, right? But it's just oh, I can do that. Oh, I didn't think about that. Like you mentioned the underwater section. Like when you first figure that out, it's like, oh my God, of course. Right. It's so cool. And it gives you flexibility too in the levels. I was playing recently, and I forget it's an earlier level, and there's a space that you can get up to by kind of going the way the game wants you to go with, through cannons and all that kind of stuff. There's a prescribed way to go. And I just found myself kind of like looping Kirby up because I was having fun doing it, and it worked just fine. I just looped all the way to the top and kind of spared my my paint meter and got him up there, and I was like, oh right, I can kind of approach this however I want to. It's a very flexible game.
Yeah. Oh, and the loop-de-loop too, it gives you a boost. It's a cool hint there, or tip, if you didn't know.
Oh, I love the boost. That.
Yeah. I don't always use it, but then when I remember, I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely meant to be, especially when you see the way the coins are lined up. It's like, oh yeah, the cool way to do this is to like loop-de-loop Kirby to grab all of them at once.
Yeah. You want to like loop-de-loop Kirby so he gets the speed boost, and then if you have the little fire capability, the little fire ability, and then blast off through there too, you can pick up some good speed.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's a speeder in this. In a crazy way.
Yeah, this is making me think about like what those speed runs must look like and how precise you have to be.
Oh man.
Like it's not just running and like making the jump at the perfect time, right? You have to have like probably pixel perfect drawing on the screen to hit whatever marks they want to hit for those runs.
Yeah.
I would do a terrible job at that. When I play against the bosses, when I do when you do the boss where you have to like paint the thing that they're painting, I'm doing real bad at it. I don't think that I'd get any quality speed runs in.
Yeah, the paint roller game where he's like copying my drawing.
I love that one, but man, am I bad at it. It's crazy.
It's a different challenge. I did most of the time trial challenges. It's really fun. It allows you to approach the level differently. And the line challenge, I don't know if you tried the line challenge, but that's really interesting because you have like such a limited amount of ink to use, and it wants you to sort of use just the amount of ink it wants for you to pass and get the medal. So you really have to think about when you're going to actually use your paintbrush in the level, at what points, and what points can you get away with not using it. So it was really fun.
That's strategy. That is a puzzle game at that point.
Yeah.
And there are also several characters you can play as in addition to Kirby. So we've got Kirby, of course, and his trick is that he has his usual copy abilities. And it really does. I mean, like, sometimes games will take a character and they'll experiment with them, but they kind of don't quite feel like the character anymore. And Kirby very much feels like Kirby. He's doing his copy abilities, like the whole aesthetic and the whole vibe of everything still feels very Kirby-like. In terms of copy abilities, we have Balloon, Beam, Burning, Crash, Freeze, Missile, Needle, Spark, Stone, Tornado, and Wheel. So a lot of familiar powers there that are all fully realized. And then along with Kirby, we have Waddle Dee. Waddle Dee is bouncier than Kirby, and he only has 4 hit points. So I don't know that there's any advantage to playing as Waddle Dee. It kind of just feels like it makes the game harder. But then we've also got King Dedede, who's a lot bigger, and he can swing his hammer. And you have Meta Knight. Meta Knight has the lowest hit points. So King Dedede has 7 hit points. Meta Knight just has 3, but he's the fastest character, and he also has a sword attack. And there's Waddle Doo. He has 5 HP, but he has like a permanent beam power.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then there were some potential characters that got cut. Apparently, in early development, there were also plans to have Lololo and La La La, Nightmare, Dark Matter, and Zero. And they have concept art of them as playable characters, but they didn't make the final cut. Which seems like they went with kind of the core characters and fewer playing it. It kind of nicks the whole idea of playing as boss characters.
Yeah, that's too bad. But I wonder if it was more of like, I guess you want each character to play different and kind of iconic to whatever it is they do. So having like a King Dedede that's kind of big but powerful, or like a Meta Knight that's fast, is like, it makes me curious what they would have done. The Lololo and La 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 one I'm really curious about, because it's like, would you have had to juggle both of them? That would be interesting, I think.
Pushing blocks around, like, I don't know what their signature thing necessarily is.
Yeah. That's too bad. But we got some good ones though.
Yeah, no, they gave us quite a game, even if they had to leave some stuff out on the cutting room floor. This is now you mentioned that, this is a game that I would love to know more about the development behind. I mean, not for any specific reason other than I just would have loved to have like learned what the conversations were like when they were prototyping this thing and thinking about it. Like, it's such a, as we talked about earlier, it's such a kind of singular experience, like understanding how they pieced this thing together and tested it to make sure it would work and be fun. And I don't know, I would love that.
Same.
Mm-hmm.
They should do another one with a whole documentary thing behind it. The Digital Eclipse style interactive documentary. Let's do it. That's what I want. I'm pitching it right now to Nintendo. If you're listening, HAL Laboratories, if you're listening, let's do this.
There is Rainbow Curse, which I guess is a spiritual follow-up to this game.
I have never played it, and this is going to be shameful for me to say. I have never played it because I have heard that it does not compare as positively to this one, and this one is such a special game that I'm like, no, I'm going to have one experience with the Kirby drawing game. Apparently, it's beautiful. They use like a claymation look, I think, in that one.
Yes. It looks nice. It does look nice. I do prefer this game. But I think the other game is good too. I just happen to love that they incorporated powers into this one.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it just, and I like the challenge of this one. I feel like this one's maybe a little more like spicy or something. So I like it.
Yeah, I've never played Rainbow Curse either. It's one of the only Kirby games I haven't played, but at some point I'll have to see how it compares to this one.
That's one of the ones that just hasn't made it over to Switch, right? It's still just
Not
Wii U.
yet. Yeah, just Wii U. It has an amazing soundtrack, so I gotta give it props for a fantastic soundtrack.
I'm always down for that. I'm always down for a good Kirby. This game has a good soundtrack too, actually. Canvas Curse has a surprisingly good soundtrack.
I love the soundtrack too. I feel like sometimes it's maybe contentious because some people maybe don't like the sound font or whatever, and it's mostly remixes. But I love it. I find it very distinct. I like it.
I think it's a nice change too. Like, it's so trippy and synthy.
Yeah.
And it really captures that kind of unsettling almost vibe that some of these stages have, right? Where you really feel like you're taken out of Kirby's regular reality to get these songs in this kind of crunchy, digital, very DS-y soundscape that we have.
I agree, and sometimes I'm mixed on the way some DS like soundtracks sound, but like I feel like this one lends into like the crunch of the DS, which is like, you know, if it's gonna be crunchy, go full crunch, you know. And this one gets like, I feel like I agree, it works with the vibe.
And then looking at the game's name in other languages, so in Japan it's called Touch Kirby, touch with an exclamation point. I like Canvas Curse better, I think.
Yeah,
it's important to have the exclamation point in there as that title. I think it's a critical component that doesn't come across in speech.
Yeah, as we think about game ratings later on.
It's it reminds me of there's something about games in Japan where it's like where you have to touch the screen. They love just mentioning touch, because there's a version of Katamari on the PS Vita that is called Touch My Katamari.
Oh, yeah.
So
I love it. That's funny. I will say this doesn't work obviously for folks listening, but if you haven't seen the box art difference between the Japanese version and the American version, it's like the quintessential America. Like Japan gets this like really nice, like kind of clean, friendly cover with Kirby smiling and a little stylus, and the American one is just Kirby looks like he's thirsty for blood, like he's out for a kill. He's frowning, he's angry, there's like sparks all around him. It's wild. It's a good distillation of the era.
I do appreciate, as someone who's not really into the more like kawaii kind of Kirby stuff, which is kind of what modern Kirby has settled into, which looks great too. Like Forgotten Land looked great and everything. But I do like some of these older ones where what Kirby looks like is a little less defined, and they were playing more with the art style, and it was cute, but it wasn't ever full on cutesy.
Yeah, there's an edge to it, I think.
Yeah, a bit of an edge. Well, and then like with the original with Kirby's Dream Land, I'm looking at the box over here right now. Like he's not even pink in this thing on the cover, right? So yeah, I'm looking at it right now. He does look different on this cover in a way that I guess I just never even thought about. Yeah, my kids, in their Kirby era right now, there's a lot of we'll just say very, very cute Kirbys around this house. So yeah, may I take it back? Let's bring back Rage Kirby.
The American versions of the plushies are all angry, but they're like the same toy. We just turned his eyebrows a little bit.
Yeah.
And then looking at some of the other names in other languages, in Canadian French, we have Kirby the Paintbrush of Power. In European French, it's Kirby Power Paintbrush.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good. Yeah. In Italian, we have Kirby the Dark Drawing.
Ooh.
I like that one.
Mamma mia.
And then other languages kind of use either, Touch Kirby or in simplified Chinese, they don't have the exclamation point. They do have just Touch Kirby.
It's just a directive at that point.
Yeah.
Do it.
How do I play? Well, Touch Kirby.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The D-pad isn't doing anything.
Touch him. It's just you open the manual and it just says touch him 1,000 times. That's it.
And then in European Spanish, we again have the paintbrush of power. El pincel del poder.
Ooh.
This is also the first Kirby game. I guess maybe this is sort of a spoiler about the final boss. So I guess if you don't want to hear anything about the final boss, I'm not going to give away too much, but just the idea of having a regular boss and then having the soul version of the boss. That's a thing we see in a lot of Kirby games now. And that started with this one. There's Dracia, who's a very fun boss, just in and of herself.
Yeah.
And then there's also Dracia's soul, which is the more creepy, monstrous, deformed version of her.
I love this boss. I love her theme.
Mhm.
I think the boss fight is very fun. I do like the introduction of the soul boss. Even though it's like a little bit different in later games, you usually have to unlock the soul boss. But I think the concept of like you beat a boss, but they still got them in there, got one more in them, and they want to come back to settle the score is like very fun idea. And this is also, I think, the first like female boss too, because every boss has been like a guy like King Dedede or Nightmare or Marks or something, or like some kind of ambiguous like thing creature. So this is kind of like fun and different for the series. I love her.
That's really cool. It's one thing about the Kirby series, I guess in general. I think this game too, and maybe the music is a big part of this. But the games, for being otherwise kind of generally, not always, but kind of generally like lower stakes feeling in the moment, or a bit friendlier, they do like spectacle and drama really well when they want to lean into it. So boss battles where you get that like the boss comes back with their second win. Like there's intensity to it that I think always takes me by surprise. The boss battles throughout this game have some of that too, and I think maybe it is the music, but it always is like really invigorating. I find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I was looking at other credits that the director, Motomi Katayama, has, and he has a really interesting background. So he's only credited on 10 games, and this is according to mobygames.com, but he was the director of Kirby Canvas Curse in 2005. He also gets special thanks on Kirby Air Ride. Yeah. He gets special thanks on Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere on the PlayStation, which is not a game I'm familiar with. Cool. He gets special thanks on Kaze no Klonoa Moonlight Museum, which is a Wonder Swan game from 1999.
Oh.
And we've talked before about the similarities between Klonoa and Kirby. So that's interesting that he would have a sort of foot over there too. You know, who knows what he was thanked for, but that he would even be mentioned. And he was also given special thanks on Klonoa Door to Phantomile. He was the senior project director for R4 Ridge Racer Type 4 on the PlayStation.
Awesome soundtrack.
Oh my god.
And he was the game director for Rage Racer. Is that connected?
That's the next one. That's
Ridge Racer?
That's Ridge Racer 3, right? Is that right? Am I wrong about that?
It might be. That one's from 1996. I'm kind of going backwards through his discography here, gameography. Yeah, I guess that's probably Ridge Racer 3 then, because that's 1996, and Ridge Racer Type 4 was 1998.
Okay, it is the fifth of all. It is the fifth installment in Ridge Racer and the third on the PlayStation. That's probably why I'm thinking of it as Ridge Racer 3. Okay.
And then he was the product coordinator on Tekken 2.
Ooh.
Whoa. That's cool.
Man.
Yeah. He was the planning assistant for Smash Court. Is that like a tennis game?
That sounds like a tennis game.
It has a tennis ball in the box art. It's a PlayStation game.
Oh, yes. The Namco one, right? I think. Yes, Namco. Sorry. Yes. Oh man, I'm going to be honest. I'm not to derail. I'm intimidated just listening to this list. I'm like intimidated by hearing all of this. There's so much impressive work. Holy smokes.
Yeah, and then like he was also thanked on Ridge Racer Revolution. And there's some other things here too. Actually, that might be all of them. He just has, depending on how it breaks down, he has sort of like more than one sort of category that he falls into with some games. But yeah, really interesting, eclectic background. But it seems like Kirby Canvas Curse was his last thing that I can find a credit for.
Interesting. 20 years ago, huh?
Whoa.
He's just like, this will be the apex of my career. I guess I'm just gonna sign off here.
Hey, he left the world. The his final work, it was a banger, and he was good to go. If this was my last game, I'd be proud.
Yeah, Alexander wept because he had created Kirby Canvas Curse, and there were no other games to make.
As far as like developers too, like this wasn't like Shinya Kumazaki's like debut, but he was a designer on this game. And something that's interesting in this game is like when you finish a level and you do the little dash jump game, it ends with like the top screen. You see some Kirby's dancing, and they're doing like the kind of victory dance at the end of the level. The aesthetic of that little portion is kind of in the style of Kirby Superstar Ultra, which would later be released in 2008, which he did that was his first directorial debut, I believe. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's fun trivia. This is actually one of the first Kumazaki Kirby games, as in like a game that he's connected to at all.
I think he did design work on Air Ride as well.
Yeah,
but yeah, also not director yet, but still he's been there somewhere.
Yeah, it looks like his first credit was as a communication debug for Nightmare in Dreamland, and then he did design on Air Ride and Kirby Canvas Curse, and then moved into more directorial roles.
If you look at, I was looking at the some of the credits here too, and Jun Ishikawa, the composer, I'm sure this is like old hat, but I am just blown away at the credits for Jun Ishikawa, starting in 1990 on the NES, and then basically every Kirby game all the way up through like 2022. It's just like living and dreaming Kirby music, which is not a bad place to be, I think. But this is it's kind of blowing my mind. How do you keep expanding on these ideas, year in and year out? It's amazing.
Yeah, we just did a music episode, actually. If you're curious to learn more about him, we talked with the people who composed the music that we do on our show, and they had just so much information on these composers that I do not have myself. But it was really interesting to hear about like how Jun Ishikawa got started with a lot of early 80s synth music, and how you can like hear some of the same synths in like Tears for Fears songs and Kate Bush and different things. And if you know what those samples are and know what those synths are. And it was really interesting to hear just Kirby music kind of connected to like the larger constellation of like music at the time.
It's so cool.
So there's definitely a lot of history to dig into there with Jun Ishikawa's career. All right. So any last thoughts on Kirby Canvas Curse?
I mean, I think we've said a lot. I think like for me, it's just coming back to it all these years later. It was amazing. I mean, the way, like, there's something, I'll try to figure out how to frame this. There's something so kind of, is primordial the wrong word for this? There's something just so that connects so at such a deep level with me about how this game operates, that when I opened it back up again, there was no onboarding again after having not played it in roughly 20 years, right? There was no, okay, how do I play this? What do I do? It was just like, all right, here we go. I know exactly how this is going to work. Kirby's going to fly exactly this far if I do this. And I just, there's such a specific design to this whole thing that I have not experienced in pretty much any other game. And it really stands out at every level for me as a special game. Sometimes I look back and think of a game that I love, and a big part of what I love is the surrounding moments of when I played it a long time ago, right? Like, which doesn't mean that the game itself isn't amazing, but that there's, oh man, I used to play this in my warm living room growing up, right? Like that kind of thing. This is a game where I genuinely, maybe by virtue of being in college at the time, I don't super remember a lot of the rest of what was going on. It's just the game. Like the game itself stands so completely alone on its own. And when I'm sitting there playing it, I feel so good. It's just such a good feeling game. I feel like I'm doing something. I could probably play another 1,000 of these things. Maybe it is time to finally pick up Rainbow Curse and give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love this game because for me it just shows the versatility of Kirby as a character, especially like compared to maybe some other platformer like characters. There's just something about how open he is with his design that even though this is entirely different from his usual stuff, I mean, I feel like the Kirbyism design is still there and that it's an easy concept for anyone to understand. It's very physical in nature. Anyone can pick up the stylus and immediately understand how this gameplay works. But to master it is like another thing. And they still make good use of the powers in this game. There's the using enemies' abilities against them that's still here. And a lot of the characters and aesthetics and things are still very like, still feels like in the realm of Kirby while being something else. And it's just like, I don't know. It's like, how do you get away with something that's so different from everything else? And I still pick it up and it's like, it's still a Kirby game. That's just to me the power of like Kirby, maybe in, you know, versus some other characters. Even though other characters are of course doing amazing stuff. I love Mario, I love all that, but something about Kirby is like, feels like Kirby can be like anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too about how much there's so much discussion of Kirby games being too easy, and this is not a Kirby game that is too easy, right?
Mm-mm.
Like it's easy to pick up and play, but there's so much depth here and so much challenge if you really want to track everything down.
It's very challenging. It's also the only Kirby game that will call you a toddler if you don't get a high enough score in one of those sub games, which I'd never seen in a Kirby game. I thought that was so funny. I loved it.
All right. And then before we go, Nick, I did want to talk to you a little bit more about your job in age ratings.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious what that looks like just on a day-to-day basis. And it also makes me think about some of the things we've seen with Kirby, too, where just giving Kirby a gun that shoots stars in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that was maybe the thing that kind of most made that an E10 game instead of an E game. So I'm just kind of curious to hear both, one, just kind of what it is you do, and if you have any thoughts on how you think companies are approaching some of these characters that they want to bring maybe a certain level of maybe like depth and maturity to sometimes that are also characters intended for children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I'm a manager. I at Riot right now is where I work, where I ply my wares. I don't even know what I'm talking about. That's not like a normal thing somebody says. That's where I work. How normal people say it. And what I do is essentially help our team look over new art assets that are coming through, new levels, new different things throughout all of our games. You know, we run a lot of live service games, and just make sure that the stuff in there is matches and meets the age ratings that we've acquired for our games globally, right? So, you know, that requires us to kind of look at, you know, okay, this one character, like there's a new skin, right? A new skin comes through. We have to take a look at it and say, all right, in the States, this is going to be fine. We have a T rating for our game here in the States. That's going to be okay. But over in, you know, this other country, they're a little bit more sensitive to the amount of skin that's being shown. So we're actually going to the work that I do is I connect our folks who work around the world at Riot and get sort of a gut check from them about whether this might be an issue in their region, both for the actual age rating itself and then also for like, you know, cultural sensitivity. Is there anything in here that we aren't thinking about that might run afoul of local customs or, you know, what people deem as appropriate? So it's kind of both of those things, the cultural element and then the age ratings compliance element for it. We operate at work very much generally within a T rating kind of, and then the equivalent around the world, you know, lots of like 12s and such around the world. And so Kirby is an interesting case to me as something that vacillates seemingly between E and E10 plus, because I'm actually sure they had I would imagine they had a lot of conversations with the Forgotten Land, the 3D one, around the intensity of the action. Because it being in 3D, it's a little bit more immersive. You can get a little bit more up close. It's a little less cartoony. I mean, it's still very cute and cartoony, but it's a little bit less cartoony. And I would imagine that they might have even had to make some concessions to stay down there, with guns and bombs and swords. I don't think the game was ever going to become a T-rated game, but just from a brand standpoint, they probably had to rein some of that in a little bit, so that folks wouldn't get upset. So kind of a wide ranging answer, but happy to answer any questions. It's fun work, and I can sort of talk myself into a circle about it because I really love it. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to sort of think about them.
Yeah, I think this all sounds really fascinating. I think as someone who's interested in art controversies and like how art is received across different cultures through their different lenses, like this just fits right into that.
Mm-hmm.
It also makes me think about Kirby and Smash Brothers too, where he is allowed to do more T-rated things, and he'll get like Bayonetta's gun shoes and stuff. And I can remember, I think in some of those earlier interviews, Masahiro Sakurai talked about like keeping guns out of Smash Brothers, and now you have like Joker with a gun, and like seems like guns are okay now in Smash Brothers, and watching Kirby get to do that is definitely something that you wouldn't see him do in one of his regular games.
I am going to say that I am blown away. This is my take. I am blown away that Smash Brothers isn't a T-rated game, frankly. I mean, like there's nothing in it that's truly appalling, right? But there's guns. The level of violence is just nonstop. The hits look pretty real. I mean, it's Mario bouncing around, but one of those hits is pretty impactful. You have characters from other series that are mature themed. There are guns. I'm sort of blown away by it. The Smash Brothers that was on Wii, was that Brawl? That one was rated T,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how they came back from that one, back down to the sort of E10 plus.
I forgot it got downgraded.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that either. I'm also interested in the category of E10 because I guess for me, I've never thought about ratings quite like this, but for me, like a 10-year-old and like a 5-year-old to me are like, they're all children. So it's like but I guess when you have to consider video games, like the amount of what maybe a 10-year-old is able to play and like comprehend versus like a 5-year-old, like you start to kind of break things down maybe more. And I'm just curious, like how that's like separated.
I think the way that I think about E versus E10 is, and I'm not the ESRB, so this is just sort of my take, is it's the difference between like G and PG, right? Most kids can probably handle, they can handle G and they can handle most PG, but there might be a little bit extra in there. There might be something that pushes the boundary just a little bit. Maybe that PG means that Kirby is exploding the little dogs in Forgotten Land, and maybe there's a little fire that stays on them, right? That wouldn't fly in the sort of more G-rated E section. In PEGI in Europe, instead of E and E10, it's 3 and then 7 before you get to 12 and 16 and 18. So they also have those sorts of delineations. I think it's just a way to create a little bit more nuance for folks. If my personal opinion, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't say this. My personal opinion is that it shouldn't be E10 plus, because I think that makes it confusing. I think it should be another letter entirely. But ESRB, feel free to reach out. Paid consultations available.
And then looking outside of Kirby too, are there just things from Riot Games or just elsewhere in your career where like something really surprised you, or what are some of those moments you might have had where it was like, oh, we thought this would be okay, but then it turns out there's some cultural angle we hadn't considered?
Yeah, there's plenty of different things, and obviously, I can't speak to specifics, within the company, so I'll be mindful of that. But I think what really has sort of just at a broader level doing this work has been super interesting for me is just the cultural differences about certain things. You can make splash art for a character where they're in a gambling parlor, right? Or they're surrounded by gold doubloons or whatever. And that's fine. They're not doing anything bad. They're not smoking a cigarette. They're not killing a guy. They're not doing anything questionable. And that's fine in the States for maybe an E, right? Or in PEGI, maybe a 7 or something like that. But it straight up will not fly in some other countries. I want to say that in Korea, for instance, you would want to straight up remove that iconography from there because it's a legal issue as much as anything else, and it will not fly in a lower rating. Different regions have different sensitivities towards violence. I think one of the bits of guidance that you sometimes hear about with PEGI is that they're surprisingly lenient's the wrong word, but they're surprisingly okay with a certain amount of violence in like a pixelated 2D kind of game. That the ESRB is not. And the reasoning is just that in Europe, I guess, the expectation is more that it's abstracted enough that no one is going to mistake it for anything real. So maybe a somewhat gory 2D pixel game might wind up being an M here, but maybe just a 12 or a 16 even over in Europe. So just the level of nuance is I think what really stands out to me.
Are there well, I'm sure there are, but like what kind of, and I know you can't say anything too specific,
yeah.
But what kind of conversations do you have about different markets and how important they are to the sales of a game and whether or not you're willing to change something? Like, are there certain things where they're like, this is just an uncompromisable part of this character? I guess we won't be able to have them in whatever country.
Yeah, that's always a conversation. And what I will say is that one of the things that I think grateful for is that generally we don't view our role as like we don't give people directives. So we don't tell someone, hey, nah, you can't have this in there, right? The idea, what we tend to do is more along the lines of, hey, if you have this in the game, if you opt to maintain this thing, if you have a character that's showing too much skin, if you really want that to be the character design, you're the artist, you're the game team, you're the product team. We trust you, and we are not the artist, so we aren't going to tell anybody what they can and can't do. We will let them know what the risk is. Right. We will let them know like, hey, this is a potentially risky maneuver in a certain place here or there. And then we let them make the decision for themselves. Do we adjust this? Do we make this blood effect look less goopy so that it is less of an issue and more of a, does it look more like steam coming out, red steam coming out, that kind of thing. So we let them, because they're the creative folks. And we don't want to get in the way of that, but those conversations for sure do happen. We serve folks, all over the place. Right. And so, trying to create something with as global a lens as possible is, it takes a village, I guess what I would say, because there's all sorts of different, responsibilities and our job is to just say, hey, these are the things we know about these regions. These are the things that these, ratings boards or agencies care about, and then they get to make the hard choice. We get the easy part. We get the easy part of just looking at some cool art and saying, "Hey, this is awesome art. Be a little careful in Germany." And then they have to do the hard work of actually figuring out what that looks like.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fun. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. It's one of those things that I think some people don't, when this is a job that oftentimes we're fortunate at Riot too, if it's okay, that we have a few people dedicated to this, like as our jobs. A lot of times, especially at smaller places, I think that this work falls under the oversight of like a release manager, maybe, somebody who works with a first party platform. They often are the ones who have to go and get the ratings and maintain them and all that. So we have folks doing it. So it's actually quite a privilege to be able to work with folks and talk to them and make that our entire day, which is kind of neat.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bridget, did you have any questions about age rating management?
I think, well, in regards to the age differences, I think that was answered. But yeah, all the other stuff mentioned was enlightening, so I think I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess my last question is just if you had any other particularly interesting things that are like specific to certain countries that they do or don't like.
Let's see here. Korea with gambling is always kind of a good go-to one. Let's see. Ooh, I'm trying to think here. That's a tough one, actually. There's a lot, and it's hard to express without getting into a lot of details. I will say, okay, how about this? And there's a lot of nuance to this, so I'm being very mindful.
Yeah, and I don't
of the
want to
fact
put
that,
you on the spot either.
no,
Anyways. You
you're
can't
not.
say
You're not.
specific
No,
things.
I think it's interesting. China has its own set of policies, obviously, and the age rating situation in China is very different. We don't really engage with that directly. You're kind of, it's more of you get a lot of oversight from the government when you are about to launch the game there, and then after that, it's a little bit different. But there are some policies. Policy is the wrong word. There are some expectations. And one of those expectations, as I've been told, is oftentimes the feedback on something is that it needs to be more serene, that content needs to be kept serene, which, if you're thinking about it from a yes, no, can I do something standpoint, keep it serene is about the least direct feedback you can possibly get, right? Like, what does that mean? But that gets more to sort of the vibe of the thing, more so than the actual content itself. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of holistic lens to look at it through. Because usually, if you're thinking about things being serene, Smash Brothers is a great example. It's the opposite of serene. It's chaos, right? It feels very violent, right? Even if it isn't egregious in any way. That would probably be problematic as it stands, for the China oversight side of things because of that. So that's one thing. I think that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of other stuff too when it comes to like marketing materials. You can't actually. Here's an interesting thing. I'll throw this out there. This is less about different regions and actually more for the ESRB. If you are watching a video game trailer for a violent video game, like a shooty game, Resident Evil kind of thing, if the game is meant for like general audiences, like if you're going to see a trailer for it during a basketball game, right? Like a Call of Duty ad during an NBA game. Keep an eye on what's happening on the screen and where they edit. There are loads of rules around headshots. Can't do headshots. Gun can't ever be pointed directly at the screen. You got to cut away before like the act of violence is like impacted. There's a great Resident Evil 4 trailer, I think for the remake, that is like maybe like the prime example of all the clever edits you got to do. So that's the other thing too. Lots of rules around marketing and what you can and can't show. So I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I know those Kirby trailers where they had to cut away right before the star hit the OC.
Yeah, they always have to cut away before the big bloodletting scene at the end of a level, and it's tough because that's such a big part of the Kirby experience.
Yeah,
but yeah, it is what it is. No, it's a really fun space with lots of nuance, and I think if I will say just as one more thing, I'm so grateful to the ESRB and Peggy and the German ratings board USK, the folks who run the. It's called IGEA. That's the group that helps the industry in Australia. All of these groups of folks, I think one thing maybe if I could dispel a myth, at least in my experience, is that these folks are not out there to necessarily ding anybody or get anybody on anything. There will be repercussions if you mess up and if you're operating in bad faith, but they are generally speaking not out to cause any to make life hard. They're actually quite cooperative and really good partners. And I think that's been pretty eye-opening and cool for me. I've always thought of them as just kind of a big monolith telling people what their game was going to be rated. And in my experience, it's not that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they're very invested in people's safety and they're invested in people having really positive experiences. Right. And that requires a bit of a hand on what people can and can't have in certain things.
Yeah, and the key to all of it is that they're open to conversation. If you have a connection there, if you have the ability to talk to them, they are very open to having a conversation, and I think that's the best part.
it's probably like a thing too, I guess. I don't know if it's like entirely drawn from this, but like I know there was like this big panic with the Mortal Kombat back in the day, and I think a lot of people knew their kids were playing games, but maybe didn't understand just how intense they can get. And now it just makes it, I guess, better for parents, maybe, if they're definitely trying to just get their kid Kirby and maybe not Mortal Kombat or something, just to know ahead of time.
I think it's helpful, right? It's like the movies, right? It's like you see it and you're like, okay, like PG-13 doesn't mean that I can or can't send my kid to it. I need to know, but at least I know like sort of what to be on the lookout for. If I'm going shopping with the kids and I see an M-rated game, probably going to at least do some digging before we buy that for them, right? And I think that's the ultimate goal. They're not the end all be all, but it's a nice way to keep folks from walking into situations where maybe they don't want their kids walking into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to teach a lot of video game themed classes online. Like I had a Nintendo history class and some other things that I taught during the pandemic. And I did have to be kind of careful talking about certain parts of video game history, because it's like, oh, well, this game is really important to mention, but the people taking this class are like 10 years old, 12 years old. And
yeah.
Like I can say this, but I don't want it to seem like I'm recommending this game.
Yeah.
And just like, even being like a teacher now, it's like, if I'm talking about a game with students, it's like, I have to kind of like think about the ages and like what they can play and what they can't play. And invariably they're all playing things that I think that they're probably too young for. So I think that I don't have to worry about that to some degree. But I do think about that, right? Even just talking about like Smash Brothers or something like that with some kids, it's sort of like, can that kid, is that going to be okay with their parents? Like, maybe I shouldn't even bring this up, even though I see them referencing it or something.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. Video games, by virtue of being like an active medium, probably makes that even more complex, right? Like it's one thing if you're, doing a film history class, you can talk to them about, maybe you're not introducing 10-year-olds to Clockwork Orange, but, you can talk to them about maybe Saving Private Ryan or, something else that maybe they wouldn't really be going in to watch, but it's clear you're not recommending it. Video games, I think we all still have this idea of them as a kid's toy, a kid's play thing. And it's an active medium. And I think both of those things, they make that kind of conversation a little bit trickier. Mm-hmm. But then they all go home and play Fortnite with their big guns and $20 skins. So who knows? Maybe it's fine.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Nic. It's been great having you here. Where on the internet can people find you if they want to learn more or follow the things you do?
Yeah, in fewer spaces, I'm finding is where they can find me on the internet. I exist on Blue Sky, the only social media network that exists. I exist on Blue Sky. I'm mcconnell.bsky.social, MCCONNELL. And I can be found on twitch.tv/NICMCCONNELL, Nic McConnell, Wednesdays at noon for video game manual stuff. And then otherwise just walking around watching my kids get into Kirby.
Nice. And we will put the links to those in the show notes as well. So yeah, tune in and watch Nic read a game manual.
Thank you.
Are there any coming up?
I usually try not to pre-design it too much because I am not a great planner. So it's fun to just sort of pop them in. I'm not exactly sure yet what we've got coming up. I would like to get back into some Sega Genesis games though soon. So maybe I'll do a Sega Genesis era.
Nice.
A lot of good manuals from that era.
Oh my God. And there was clearly no policy around like design for them. So it's just all over the place. It's fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you both so much again for being here. This has been Kirby Conversations. I'm Sean Douglas, and our podcast is also presented by Bridget and Gigi from Wick Kirby and Kai, Captain Dangerous Parker. Thank you again to Nic McConnell for being here. If you'd like to reach out to the show, our social media handles are all in the show notes as well. Blue Sky is the main space to find this podcast. We also post on Instagram and post some of our episodes in a video form on YouTube. You can also email us at mail@kirbyconversations.com. Our theme music is by Megan Kells in a new arrangement by Duncan Pixel T. Smith. And if you enjoyed this show, we hope you will consider subscribing in your podcast player and potentially leaving us a nice review too if you thought this was worth it. Positive reviews do go a long way in supporting the show as well. So thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in another 2 weeks with more Kirby Conversations.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
How much do you have to worry about things like mods or like unofficial content related to a game? Like, do you have to like anticipate things being like, we don't want to give anyone ideas, so we're going to leave that out of the game?
Nah, we're things that happen outside of the game. As long as we aren't also then boosting it, right? As long as we aren't saying, "Oh, this is great. Here, check this out." That's sort of just gonna be what it is. So we don't have any our team at least doesn't have any oversight over potential risk for like UGC, right? User generated content or anything like that. I'm sure that there are folks at the company and at other video game companies that do have that in mind, right? Where the fan base might go, but that's not something that we have to worry ourselves with. If we did have to worry ourselves with that, we would probably need about 500 more people on our team, because that would be there'd be a lot to consider there, I think.
Yeah.